This is the last talk in a series called Little Letters, Big Messages. And the question today is, what is truth? Nate gave us the first 3 talks. Each one is about a New Testament letter that's only 1 chapter long in our Bibles. It's a typical length of 1 sheet of papyrus for a first century message that's going to be sent out to be read out loud to a group of people. Only 4 letters in the New Testament are this long, or this short, or this brief, or little. They're little letters, but with a big message. In fact, these 4 letters are so little, they could have easily been brushed aside as inconsequential when the early church fathers were reaching their consensus on which letters should be officially affirmed as part of the New Testament scriptures. What is truth? That's the question that Pilate famously asked Jesus just hours before he delivered him to be crucified. And today we still ask that question. In fact, many times when somebody gives an opinion we disagree with, or they speak in a tone of voice we don't like, we're likely to say to ourselves, how do I know that's true? We often conclude that it sounds like fake news, or we simply dismiss things that are outside our own experience by thinking to ourselves, that can't be true. So what is truth? Now, the search for truth and existential meaning means the purpose and meaning of life. It's given rise in the last century to a philosophical movement called deconstructionism. And I studied philosophy, so I had to read a little bit of that, thankfully, a long time ago, as that movement was starting. But the deconstruction of literature, art, worldviews, belief systems has grown so popular in recent decades that to be a deconstructionist is a badge of honor for many. For example, I could say, we're just struggling with one of the speakers back there. For example, I could say, I'm deconstructing my faith, which means I'm questioning, I'm doubting, I'm reconsidering pretty much everything that I've been taught or understood. This person is asking the question, what is truth? Deconstructing means breaking something down, considering the source, considering a proposition against my own experience, and determining if a supposed truth aligns with my values and opinions. Now, right now, we're going to consider a little letter with a big message. This little letter is called 2 John. And in the first sentence, the author, the writer, uses the word truth 4 times in the first sentence. So I think John's little letter still has a big message for us today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the letter out loud, and as I read it, I'm going to make comments. And the text will be on the screen. If you have your own Bible or something you want to look it up, that's great. But also, we'll put it on the screen. So just so you know, I considered notes from the New Testament scholars like N.T. Wright, Craig Keener, and Ben Witherington. And they come from different sort of theological backgrounds. I reviewed my notes in a few different study Bibles. And I also read and reread the letters of John. So it's very important to remember that every part of the New Testament was written with a specific audience in mind, in a specific cultural context, in the midst of real-time historical events. And so maybe this can help us understand the author's original intent. Just for example, as we're sitting here this morning in this time and place, or in this Zoom room, wherever you are, we come from so many different places, even driving here today. and different languages and different cultures. So the way that you're even hearing what I'm saying or experiencing this room is going to be very different for different ones of us. And so as we try to think, well, who is John? I mean, why is he saying this? What is his point? That's what we're trying to do. When I say John, that's my name. That's what we're trying to do with John, the writer's name, when we read his letter. Who is this guy? What is he doing? So the closer we can come to understanding the text within a context, then the more likely we are to find a helpful application and some wisdom for our life today. Let me say that again. The closer we can come to finding that's why I need to say it again. The closer we can come to understanding the text within its context, the more likely we are to find a helpful application and some guidance for our life today. Okay? So most scholars would agree that the author of 2 John is the Apostle John. As in, you remember in the New Testament Gospels, Peter, James, and John, the most important of the three disciples, part of Jesus' inner circle. John is generally considered to be the author of a gospel, the Gospel of John, 3 letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. So last year, many of us studied together the first 14 chapters of John's Gospel. We spent about 20 weeks looking at it together. And in March, we'll be renewing our study for chapters 15 to 21. Everyone will be invited. I'll tell you about that next week. Now picture John. John is this guy, and you say, I don't know what he looks like. So he's a fisherman. And when he was a young man, they called him a son of thunder because of his energy and his attitude, a son of thunder. Imagine that. So at the Last Supper, he sat closest to Jesus and recorded his words. John stood at the cross when Jesus was crucified, and Jesus asked him to care for Jesus' mother, Mary. John helped to start and lead the Jerusalem church for a time which grew almost overnight to many, many thousands of people. Eventually, he went on to become the pastor of the church at Ephesus. You remember Paul wrote a letter to the church at Ephesus, and in your Bible it's called Ephesians. Well, John was the pastor there for decades. Paul started the church, then John went later. It was a difficult assignment. John outlived all of Jesus' other 12 disciples, which helps us think he must have been one of the youngest. Now, he's definitely the oldest. Most of his writings take place as a prisoner of Rome in exile 20 to 30 years after Peter and Paul and many others were killed in a time of cultural oppression and religious persecution. So when John writes, he does so as what he calls an elder. An elder was a useful term in those days to mean a wise grandfather who shares wisdom and guidance with his people. John had lived a long life. He had had plenty of time to reflect. He had kept the faith for 60 years since he first met Jesus, and he had pastored one of the great multicultural church communities through decades of growth, challenge, and persecution. Now he's sending a text. A text, yeah, I get it. It's a joke. He's sending, but it was real. He was sending a text, a message to encourage and equip the church. So I say all that about John because as we read this little tiny letter, you read it and it's gone and you think, why did we even read that? And I just want you to remember that there's a person behind the letter. And there's also an audience receiving that message. And so it just maybe helps us to get into their mindset a little bit. So here's what the text says. Here's how the letter begins. The elder. That's John identifying himself as the author. The elder, to the lady chosen by God and to her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth, which lives in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, who will be with us in truth and love. Now that's one sentence. I had to study some Greek, maybe you have too, and you all speak languages I don't, so you know how sentences can just go on in some languages. And then it gets complicated. So let me just say, John is the elder. It sounds like he's writing to a lady that he knows, but my sources agree that he's actually writing to a church community in dangerous times. So he's using the community, he is addressing them in code, saying the chosen lady and her children, instead of identifying a specific church community that he's talking to. So did you notice the word truth? It's up there on the screen. What is truth? John says he loves in the truth. People know the truth. He writes because of the truth, and that Jesus Christ, or grace, mercy, and peace of Jesus, is with us in truth and love. So truth is more than just a right answer or a fact. Like to say, it's a beautiful day, or it's a cold day, or I had scrambled eggs for breakfast. The truth is more than that. John is writing about something that's much deeper and wider and all-encompassing. In fact, in verse 2, he says, the truth lives in us and will be with us forever. And so I want to say truth for John is the light and life of God revealed as love, which is working in and throughout all of the world, the whole cosmos. Ultimate truth for John is an eternal life force that cannot be deconstructed. So deconstructing, I said, is something we do. We doubt, we wonder, we ask, what is truth? And John is saying, not just here it's more compact, but if you read this gospel and his other letters, it's the life force. It's the whole big picture. There's ultimate truth. Faith is recognizing that truth exists and that we exist within truth. We can deconstruct our faith by questioning our experiences and what others may have taught us, but we cannot deconstruct ultimate reality. And so we find that we must recognize that God exists outside of ourselves and try to know him by faith, or we must turn away from spiritual realities and search for meaning inside of ourselves. So John, in these words, is commending, and in the words that come, he's commending the community for entering into what he calls living eternal truth of God's love expressed through his Son, Jesus Christ. Wow. Like I said, that's only the first sentence. So a little letter with a big message. Now, John, as usual, is talking about more than truth. He's also talking about love. He says his love in the truth for the lady, which really is the church community, and her children, the people of that community. And then John suggests that we can experience grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and the Son. And so he's putting all these things together. Remember, I said he's been doing this for 60 years. He's been reflecting. He's at the end of his life, and he wants to make every word count on his one piece of papyrus paper or parchment that he's going to send around. So what is grace? Is grace, mercy, peace? Grace means love we don't deserve. Grace is when you receive a gift that you don't even deserve. Mercy is getting better than you deserve, like compassion instead of judgment. Have you ever felt somebody judge you and you wish they would have a little compassion? That's what you're wishing for, is mercy. Or peace. Peace means just being content to trust. Trust that everything's going to work out. Peace is when you're just at rest. You're like, okay, the circumstances may be very bad around you, but you can be at peace knowing and trusting that things are going to work out. So grace, mercy, and peace, it's at the intersection of truth and love because Jesus is present there. That's the place of ultimate connection of life, light, and love. Now, I'm sure some of you are saying, wow, this is just light and love, and John is like into his philosophy, and so it's a challenge. But this is like this compact message, and it's very profound, but it's very John, the Apostle John. So, love and truth is the way that Jesus is present with us in the world. That's what John is saying. Love and truth can overflow from our lives to others because of the way that Jesus is present in us. So when people talk about God's love, John is adding in this concept of truth and the person of Jesus. We say, well, how does that work? What are you talking about? So I feel like I'm making it harder to understand than it needs to be. But you have probably all experienced people who talk about God, but don't show much love. I mean, you've said, where's the love? And maybe they showed love, but you recognized, where's the truth? Where's the integrity? And so I want to say, ultimately, truth belongs to God. He's the source of ultimate truth. All truth will eventually lead us back to God. He's the source, and it's the same with love. So love and truth have their source in God. And yet we see people talking about God, and they don't seem to have much love or much truth. So what does John do with that? Now in his first letter, 1 John 4:19, he said, "We love others because God first loved us." Now that sounds simple, but it's a profound way of saying the source of true love, it comes from God. The source of ultimate truth comes from God. And so it starts in God, it flows through Jesus Christ. This is John's message. And the purpose is so that it could flow into our hearts and minds. It could redeem and transform us to reflect the light and life of God to others. So there's a purpose, the love and the truth, the grace, mercy, peace. It should come from God through us for the purpose of being reflected out to other people. Peter described it this way. He said, the children of God can and should shine like stars in the universe. Have you ever looked out at the night sky and said, wow, that's beautiful? Uruguay has that gift because there's not so many lights. You can go outside the city or to the beach and find places where you can see the stars. And Peter said we should shine like stars in the universe, beautiful lights in the night sky. So listen to what John says about meeting some people who really shine. I said shined or shone in the dark. This is reading from verse 4 of John's little letter. He says, "It has given me great joy to find some of your children," remember he's talking to this community, "some of your children walking in the truth just as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new command, but one we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love." Again, he's repeating himself. If the first sentence was about truth, this one's about love. He's repeating a familiar message. The command to love one another actually comes from the books of Moses. Leviticus 19:18 says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Now you've heard that before, but Moses lived 1,300 years before Jesus. And during all that time, experts studied the law. And Jesus surprised all those legalists and lawyers when he taught them And he said, the greatest commandment ever given is to love. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Can you imagine this world if all of the people who called themselves Christians really lived according to a law of love? Well, John emphasized God's love in all of his writings. He used simple words to convey profound truths. Love, John says, unlocks the power of light and life and brings us to a place of grace, mercy, and peace. He's not talking about a romantic feeling or an exotic experience that may have their place in life, but here John is talking about a profound spiritual reality that God himself is love. Love is truth. Truth is love. Wherever truth and love come together, Jesus is present, bringing grace, mercy, and peace. And so many people were looking for peace and asking for mercy and wishing someone would have some grace for us. So let me try to illustrate this with what they call a Venn diagram. Somebody told me a Venn diagram once. I had no idea what they were talking about, but now I do. So this is a simple Venn diagram. A Venn diagram, basically, and you've probably, if you didn't know the word, you knew what it was, is you have two circles, and then you bring them together, and the space where they overlap shows what they have in common. And so with this diagram, on one side we have love, and on the other side we have truth. And in the overlap in the middle, GMP, grace, mercy, and peace. Okay, see that? So a circle of truth, a circle of love, John's big themes, and in the middle where they meet, grace, mercy, and peace. So let me say this. Truth without love is pure logic. Now, my dad is a logician. Logician, like he does logic. He's a philosopher. But he has a lot of love, thankfully. But I know about rational, logical people. A person who has all logic can win every argument, but has very few friends. This person might be right, but they're no fun to be around. Now, love without truth is pure emotion, like a person who will always do what you want, but doesn't seem to have their own personality or opinion. So truth needs to be spoken in love, with love. And love needs to speak the truth. And when truth and love come together, we can experience God's grace, mercy, and peace. So truth, let me just say again, is not about having the right answers. Let me take some pressure off all of you. If you're the doctor, some of you are doctors, then we want the doctors that always have the right answer. But really, in life, you don't have to have the right answer. That's why we work in teams. That's why we get together with people of other ages or cultures to ask questions, to learn. You don't have to have the right answer. Truth is about living with integrity and wholeness, completeness, being honest, open, transparent. Truth means walking in the light and the life of God. Truth means, John says, recognizing that Jesus came from heaven. Sorry, Zoom people, I got away from the mic. Truth means recognizing that Jesus came from heaven to be born a human being, bringing God's love, light, and life into the darkness of our world. Now, let me say something, and Dave, this isn't in the notes. That seems like such a crazy concept to even be talking about on a beautiful day when we could be walking on the beach. And yet John is saying, I'm one of the last living people who was actually there. They'll tell you lots of things about Jesus, but I was there. He says in 1 John, I saw him. I touched him with my eyes and my ears. We were together. This man was born as a baby. And I saw the little baby and held my grandson just not so long ago. So A little helpless baby can do nothing for himself. And he grew. And this is a powerful cosmic miracle and mystery. And John describes it in the Gospel of John, the first chapter. The light came from heaven into the darkness, and God became a man. So now John greets the church. He thanks them for sending amazing people to visit him, and he has this strong word of encouragement to live in love by walking in obedience. And he means all the light that we have from God, do it. But he has a word of warning about some people he calls deceivers. And it's interesting because all this talk about love. And in today's world, we usually think love means tolerant. So if I'm a loving person, I just have to be nice to you no matter what you say, no matter what you do. So it's interesting now to hear John's next words, the apostle of love. Verse 7. The words are up here. He says, I say this because many deceivers who did not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have, in other words, that's very important to him that Jesus was a real person. They've gone out into the world. And any person like this is a deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for, that you may be rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. He always wants to make sure we understand the Father and the Son are together. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your house or welcome them. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. Wow. So just reading this right now sounds harsh. These are strong words. Is John being judgmental and hateful? Just what does he mean by deceivers? And why would loving someone by welcoming them possibly be a bad thing? Or remember, I suggested that we should try to understand the context. John and the other New Testament writers have already addressed the issue of false teachers, deceivers, in earlier writings. People who pretended to bring a Christian message in order to get something for themselves. And apparently these deceivers traveled around as preachers and teachers looking for an audience who would host them and pay them. And so they offered to teach the hidden secrets for spiritual, physical, and financial well-being. At that time, one of the ways to gain a following was to to explain the divine nature of Christ, his spiritual essence, in such a way that his human nature was denied. They made Jesus, in other words, into such a saint that they ignored the miracle of his humanity. They argued that Jesus was a spiritual being and that all the material and physical substance was just a hindrance, an obstacle to growth and enlightenment. So listen, when you deny Jesus' humanity, then you deny his suffering and sacrifice. If he's not human, he never suffered. He really can't identify with me. So then you're denying his power to redeem my physical and emotional brokenness. Yet Jesus himself said this was part of the very work he came to do. So, I'm almost done here. You guys are great listening and considering these deep thoughts. But John is an elderly grandfather. But he still had the heart of a warrior. John was a fisherman. And if you read his story, he carried the scars from whips, from beatings, from jail cells. He had suffered much, but he had found a peace and a purpose beyond understanding. And that's why they kept including his little letters and said, these are the things we have to read. This guy found truth and love. He described his life in 1 John as, imagine if you could describe your life this way. Someday look back and tell people, this is how I experience life. And imagine if they looked and said, you know what? You do. And John said, I am walking in the light, in fellowship with God and my fellow man. And I'm experiencing fullness of joy, full joy. Now, if they thought that John was making that up, they'd have never included his letters. Said, that guy's a lot of talk. Anybody can talk. Everybody can talk. But can your life reflect it? And they said, this guy is the apostle of love. And what I said before, he said, I'm writing about what I saw, I heard, I handled with my own eyes, ears, and my hands. Jesus lived among us, yet he revealed a power beyond our imagination, a love beyond our comprehension by becoming a helpless baby, living among us. He showed us how to live, how to die, and he shared with us a seemingly impossible promise of resurrection. John quoted Jesus as saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. I come from the Father. I am light in the darkness. I am life in the midst of suffering and death. And John says, anyone who pretends to represent Christ but does not believe that he truly came to serve and suffer, that person is an imposter, is a fake. You don't owe them any hospitality, he says to that church who probably had some pressure. You don't owe them any hospitality or speaking opportunities in your community. Don't feel guilty. John is loving, but his love has limits. Any humble seeker of truth is welcome, but deceivers are not. The church is called to live in love, but also in truth. Don't waste your life arguing with deceivers. Focus on finding connections with the people who are seeking God's truth. And so John's life was a meaningful pursuit of quietly reflecting the light and love of God to all who came his way. John wrote in Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20, the message that's depicted on this window behind me. Jesus himself, John said, stands at the door and knocks. It's a proverbial door, a metaphor. He stands quietly at the entrance to our inner life and offers to come in. If anyone opens the door, John said, he will enter as a friend. I have not called you servants, Jesus once said to John and the others. I have not called you servants, but friends. And so John wrote in his first letter, if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. We have connection, and we can have freedom from our guilt and our shame and our fear. So the big message of this little letter is that Jesus was God among us, fully human, fully divine. The truth is a mystery called love. And this love is the life force of the cosmos and beyond. God's grace, mercy, and peace are found in the space where truth and love meet in the person of Jesus. So John says, Jesus brought God into my world, and because of that, I can bring him into your world, and you can bring him into the worlds of other people. You can share, I can share God's love and truth. And the last verses say this. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. I wonder if he first wrote papyrus and ink. What do you think, Pete? Think he might have said that? Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. He didn't have Zoom, but he still preferred to be face to face like we do. The children of your sister, which would mean the people of my community here, chosen by God, send their greetings, and so do I. This is my word to you. So do I. I send my greetings. Thanks for joining us today and always. It's a joy and a privilege to belong to the community of Christ Church here in Montevideo. So God's light and love, may that fill your hearts and his truth and accompany you as you think on these things and reflect and ask yourself, what is truth? And seek for the light. If you look for the truth, wherever you find it, it's going to ultimately lead you to the real source, which comes from the God of love.